makeup, I have to say in a nutshell, basically we have to be very good at our job and we have to rely on our eyes. Our eyes are HD, and with HD, by definition, it means it's sharp imagery. And for years, all the time, we rely on our eyes to create and adjust makeups to our eye before they go on camera. If it looks good to the eye, it will look good on a camera, on shot, for HD or 3D. So generally speaking nowadays as well, when we judge things to our eye, especially with things being done in post-production, and monitors on sets are just guidelines, so we do use our eyes completely to judge. With HD, the main thing is that a person's skin, their bone structure and hair are completely on display. A close-up on any performer means that everything is on show for the viewer to pick up every detail. So any blemish, any flaw, i.e. tiredness, spots, will be as visible as they are to the human eye. So this can actually mean that the viewer sometimes can be, their concentration can be sidetracked or drawn away from the drama or what in fact is being said. Because with HD, the realism of HD means that textures are mainly highlighted, especially textures. So this means that if somebody is naturally downy on their face, if they have any bad spots or they've got bad skin, dry skin, anything like this, tiredness, all this can be picked up and is an unwelcome distraction. So generally speaking, when we do makeup, it has to be extremely well blended. Every detail, you pay attention to every single little detail. And with HD, there's certain things we've had to adjust with. For instance, mainly when people get hot, we used to use a lot of powder to take that shine away. But in fact, with HD, layers of powder can build up and actually be picked up on camera. So we use a lot of just blotting or mattifiers to take this down. We have to be careful that a base or a makeup is applied in a very light way, but with enough coverage. So this is why we blend massively, and why nowadays as well, airbrushing is often thought of as a way forward for HD. This is mainly because airbrushing is a sort of form of pointillism painting, and at a very low pressure, it deposits a makeup base through a sort of a conical shaped spray pattern, which is lots of millions of tiny pixels, a bit like high definition. And this actually rests on the skin, on the surface of the skin, and it allows the eye to perceive it in a much more natural, smoother looking complexion. However, whether it be airbrushing, brushes, sponge, fingers, at the end of the day, it is actually down to each individual, and it's your hand and the dexterity that's moved with the hand that dictates how good a makeup looks. What's interesting from our point of view is that a lot of the time, if makeup isn't picked up on, we've done a good job. And to give a really current example, Mark Coulier, who won the BAFTA and hopefully will win the Oscar for Iron Lady, the makeup he did on Meryl Streep, not to take away from her performance whatsoever. However, if his aging makeup had not worked and looked as good as it did, flawless, and there were no edges visible, all this thing, then her performance would have been slightly, not impaired, but people would have made comment on it. It might have been that she'd acted really well, but it's a shame that some of the aging didn't look as good as it did. How that happens is that, I don't know how many of you remember back to a performance by Nicole Kidman on a film called The Hours, where she played Virginia Woolf, and she was given a false nose. Now, a nose actually, aging pieces all over a face, it's incredibly clever, and the work involved, I'll give you a slight inkling of how these things start, but the work involved is massive. But something like a nose is incredibly hard to do because it is actually surrounded by real skin, live skin. And as I said, HD picks up textures, so things that change in texture are much more noticeable. So you can actually blend with a lot of colour, but if the actual texture of the skin changes, that can be highlighted. But what happened with the hours was the fact that the material that was chosen was actually quite volatile to lighting. And although on a lot of the close-ups, on a lot of it, you could not actually see joins. The joins were flawless, but it was the colouring that sometimes let the piece down, and it actually came out very grey. And that slightly is down to, unfortunately, lighting and daylight and things like that. And that's where our choice of using what materials when really comes into play. But interestingly enough, Mark Cooley was interviewed, and I believe they was talking about how well he'd done with Meryl Streep's nose when she was just the younger Margaret Thatcher. And he said, yes, but what about all the aging? That was the mammoth task, and he did that incredibly well, but it almost went unnoticed. So that's quite a sort of tricky situation to be in, because basically, if we've done a good job, everything should blend in to the characterization, and nobody should really pick up on any of the work. So if you have a man who walks in who's completely bald, perhaps been beaten up, I have actually done this earlier. This is one like Blue Peter. Here's the makeup I've done earlier. I just thought it was easier than coming here and doing something. But on Catherine, she has got obviously a swelling on her eye, which is actually made out of gelatin. It's a gelatin prosthetic piece that warms nicely to the skin. I remember that. And I've sort of done beating up on the other side, just give an inkling. But something that Mark Cooley would have done in massive form is that it starts life as a cast, and you have an eye cast. This is just an eye cast it's only in plaster, so it's a cheap and cheerful method, and the eye cast is taken off a whole face cast, and then a new eye is moulded to what you want it to eventually be, and from that another cast is taken, so that you get something like this. Once that is taken apart, the modelling is taken away, and you actually have your new piece, which is in fact the piece that Catherine has on her eye now, which actually looks, when you actually have the gelatine put in, looks and sits in the mould like this. So, and one piece is used per day or per time that actor or actress comes in to be used. So the time it takes to get to just this stage is there's a lot of work involved into making these pieces. And they can be made out of resin, which is what this one is, and that's just a sculpting for a little eye bag. And these are more used much more because they're unbreakable, really. I could drop this and nothing would happen to it. If I drop the plaster mold, I've lost it. And then we have also fiberglass, which is much more lightweight. Again, that was just done for eye bags as well. It's a fiberglass mold. This is obviously in very, very small scale. I didn't know how big an audience this would be, but just to give you an idea, everything nowadays, when we choose prosthetics, we are very much aware of what looks more lifelike. And years ago, the only thing available really was what was called foam latex. And this is a neck that I've had left over from previous filming years ago, which is actually foam. If I was to offer this up to Catherine, you can see that it doesn't look particularly lifelike, okay? And foam latex was what was all around. Then gelatine came into being, but even that was very volatile. Gelatine's very volatile to body temperatures and heat. The eye Catherine has had on since about 9 o'clock this morning, something along those lines, and we have been in a car and come here, and it's warmed nicely, but if we were filming in sort of like the desert of Sahara, I might not choose to use it out of gelatine. I might choose to use silicone. Now, I was even going to offer to pass this round because it's quite interesting to feel silicone. I don't know how many of you have ever come across it really, but this has been used and taken off, so it's not really usable again. But this one, if I offer it up, has a much more skin-like property to it, as you can all see from on the camera. Okay, so this is the way forward, and in fact, this is what was used obviously on the Iron Lady. And silicone is what most prosthetics nowadays are made of. Silicone is indestructible, so we encapsulate it in a sort of what's called a cap plastic that can be dissolved, so we can hopefully make the edges flawless and not seen. But to get to this stage is lengthy, and as I say, more than often than not, it's one piece per day. So this is where the cost of a lot of the filming goes, really, when we do it. But I'm very happy to pass these round if you want to have a feel, or at the end you can come up and feel. But I'm very happy to if you want to have a. Do you want to have a feel? The difference between the two. It's heavy as well. So generally speaking, when we look at prosthetics, it is usually nowadays, as I say, gelatin or silicone rather than the foam latex. However, when we come to more and more, you don't enter into doing prosthetics for high definition. 3D, it makes no odds to us. Basically, it has to look good to the eye. So although people think it makes a difference to us. In the old days with standard television, really, some of the makeups, it was true. You could actually, didn't necessarily come up to the same, weren't closed, didn't have quite such a, I suppose, needed to be quite so fine as they do now. We did get away with a few things. On the big screen, that wasn't the case. Filming and big screen is a different entity, but in television, some images weren't brought in quite so prominently. So there were cases of getting away with things. But now, crucially, also with wig lace, we have to take into consideration how many times you choose to have wigs made. A, the cost of having these things made when you're looking at several thousand, or whether you're talking using that person's own hair. Because lace, I haven't got a hair lace wig or anything, or even beard to show, but the hair lace involved is quite fine, but can pick up on HD and 3D. So what we find we try and do is either use own hair, certainly at the front and at the napes, and then you use pieces. And if we have to use hair lace, sometimes we call what's called overlay, and we actually lay on literally strands of hair to cover those edges that aren't very good. I lost have I knocked that now? That's another criteria we look into, the hair pieces. At the end of the day, however, sorry, it's moved slightly there. At the end of the day, I've lost the sound, haven't I, slightly? I talk with my hands, unfortunately, so there it is, that's better, that's it. So at the end of the day, really, we need good communication with directors and the lighting cameraman. You need a sympathetic cameraman because really, any hard lighting is not makeup or performer friendly. You need, especially in close-ups, a softer lighting is much more flattering. Now, if there is bad skin, or there's sweat, or there's tiredness, and it's in part of the characterization, it doesn't matter, so long as, of course, it's done well. It still has to be applied well, but everybody takes it. But if it's actually the actor more or less playing themselves, or how they are normally seen, that's when things like the down and spots and things like that can be quite cruel on HD. And there is actually, at the end of the day, only so much that we can actually do to disguise texture. We're very good with colors, but texture is another entity. So you do find people will comment and say, well, you know, they look very hairy, or they, and things like that, unfortunately, do pick up. Generally speaking, with certain textures, we do a lot now, even more subtle shading and highlighting, because at the end of the day, if you have actually a protrusion, you've got a lot of light on the top and dark underneath, so we actually do the reverse. You can't just cover a spot how you might, people who just in the, in the ordinary high street might sell things to cover spots. You do actually have to exercise quite a lot of artistry in disguising the top, darkening it down, and actually highlighting underneath, so the whole thing is flattened. And that goes the same when people are, the darker the skins, sometimes the more different the face tones are, and we try and even these out using a lot more colors these days. So it does, basically, it keeps us on our toes, really. We do have to be very good at what we do. But from the point of view of production teams, a reasonable budget is always welcome, because obviously things now sometimes will cost more, and equally scheduling well from the point of view of allowing people enough time to actually do the makeups properly is always welcome, because actually now, especially with HD and 3D, because the performers their faces are much more scrutinized and people come in really close, it would be nice if the makeup was actually taken really quite seriously now. So on that note, I'm just going to show you some of the other tricks and things that we look for when we do things. A substance that we're doing more and more, apart from the gelatine and the silicone, that's used for small pieces. Going back, because I'm afraid I'm not used to public speaking, and I tend to digress and come back, is that when you are having to use special effects, in the sense of not creating, like for Harry Potter, the monsters and the elves and all these sort of things, but if we're talking more like the Iron Lady, where it's a much more natural, inverted commas, look, it's a progress, a human progress, you do consider how much you have to actually do. And another colleague of mine did something called, to do with Saddam Hussein's double, called Devil's Double, I think it was called. And they decided that they didn't want to go into great big pieces because, A, they were filming in Malta in the heat. So they went for very subtle little changes on the cheek, just literally little pieces that went subtly on the cheek, and gave him a different nose. It wasn't a complete nose, but it was small little bits to make it much more sort of Arabic. On that score, they were made out of something called Pro Bondo, and we use these by, I've got some examples here. These are actually in a silicone mold, and the material itself is actually painted into these molds. The downside is that if I went wrong with this particular one, I haven't got one here at the moment that matches it. So you do actually have to have a few of the same, but the material is in there to be used. And for wounds and subtle little things, you can actually create little eye bags, cheap pieces, but it's used a lot for scars, for cuts, and things like that, because it's pretty instant. And if I show you, I'll just prepare here on Catherine, this one here. And just prepare the skin. It just needs to have a skin that's oil-free. If anybody's got, while I'm doing this, got any questions, how am I doing them to? Or do it on your hand. I'll do. I suppose I could actually probably do it on the face, but I was going to just do it on the hand, if that's all right, with the blood dripping. I don't know. Is it possible to tip this camera down? I could either do it for a cross. The action is that it's a bit like having a plaster. This is a silicone mold. So what's happened is the actual piece that is decided upon is sculpted, and then silicone is poured in, and is just a flat mold, and then we peel off. Now that just then needs the outside edge blended in a little bit more. Do ask any questions while I'm doing this, because, yes. Anybody else? You could say it. Can I hear you?
Hello, I was just wanting to know whether there are any irritants in something like that, and whether the actors and actresses have to have any kind of base protection.
No, but obviously that's a key question we find out about an artist from the word go,
Yes.
if they're allergic to anything.
Yes.
Because obviously something like the foam latex, if somebody's actually got a latex allergy, that would be a complete no. And often some artists don't know that they have got irritants.
Yes.
If a prosthetic piece is used every several days, their skin we do need to look after it.
Yes.
And there is a material called derm shield that we can actually put on that forms a very, very fine sort of plastic coating that helps protect the skin underneath.
Yes.
But we do then, there's a lot of aftercare
Yes.
to our job that's not only at the beginning of obviously soothing artists, getting them in the right frame of mind, helping them in their part, but at the end of the day, a lot of the makeups, especially when they are completely covering a face, can take almost as long as putting them on, and these can't just be ripped off. The artist wants to go, but they need to be taken off very slowly and carefully, because obviously we need the skin to be in good condition for the next day when they've got to be put on all over again.
Yes.
So a lot of, there's moisturizers, and we do encourage all that
Yes.
skin care, really.
Can I just ask another question about the silicone that is actually used?
It's
Does
a
that have to
platinum.
be a special
Yes.
makeup grade or?
Yes, it is. It's
clinical
not
grade?
a tin, it's a platinum. It's a platinum. The one we use is actually called Platsil 10, and it's generally, but it is safe. It's
Yes.
completely safe.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of silicone is in the makeups. When any makeup base that says it helps towards anti-aging, if you know what silicone feels like, you can feel the silicone in the base, and it smooths the skin. And it acts as it sort of helps keep moisture in underneath, which is good. It doesn't actually stop aging, unfortunately, but it does. Yeah. Anybody else?
Is there a separate prosthetics department in film?
Yes, there is.
So they
yes.
make up all the fake
Well,
skin and everything?
there's very grey areas, really, because there are prosthetic special effects makeup. There's makeup prosthetics, and then there are special effects as well. I mean, there are grey areas. In films, they tend to be more demarked from the makeup. Obviously, Mark Coulier is a prosthetic makeup man, and there was a makeup and hair team on the film. Hair separate, makeup separate, and prosthetics separate. And I've been helping out. In fact, Mark Coulier was in charge of this part. It was a zombie film that won't come out till next year with Brad Pitt, and that we were very separate. We were in even my little section wasn't even prosthetic, it was prosthetic hair. So we dealt with bald caps and then putting hair bits on, and there was a separate prosthetic team who were putting on all the facial bits and anything further down the necks and arms, and then there was a makeup team and a hair team. So there is separate, but television, it's very much more you do everything. And in fact, from learning point of view, when because I do a lot of teaching of makeup and prosthetics, and actually we say don't discount. Most people want to sort of get into the film world, but actually a trainee in films can often be making tea and coffee and paper punching for a long time, whereas in television, because of the time element and the money, people get to do actual makeups much earlier on, and it's a faster training ground in a way, because they have to do it. There's not the money to resource, whereas in films often there's more budget for these things. I've lost track. What did you it's about the tea, yes. But if it is a grey area, because there are some people who would do everything. If I was to cut Catherine's hand off, say the hand came off in action, it could be a different department that dealt with the hand that landed on the floor and supplied that to the person who then makes it look as though Catherine's hand is missing. It becomes a slightly... Is that me? Is that me? I said. So it is a slightly grey area in some areas, but on the whole films, they are there's much more demarcation in the film world. And a lot of it is how much you actually want to do yourself. I at the BBC, ended up because I like this sort of type of thing, ended up doing more things that involve prosthetics. And then when I left, I was known for applying a lot of prosthetics. So you get sort of slightly pigeonholed into different things often. But initially, I started off doing the whole lot, really. Sorry, I'm doing this. I'm just going to put a little bit of colour onto this side of the flesh where it's much paler than Catherine. But the main thing is that piece, the blood I put in can be washed away. It's water-based. But I can rub this. Catherine could actually go to the toilet and wash her hands and shower, and this piece would actually stay. It's incredible the way you just lose edges. You don't really see where the edges have gone, and it's used more and more. It was pioneered by an American, but I don't know how many of you, it sort of started off being used slightly in film Last Samurai, and then the film Apocalypto that came out. I don't know how many of you have seen that film, but all the scarification was used using this sort of method. There was a massive task in there of doing it. Anybody else got any questions?
Hi, I've got a question. Hello.
Wait,
I'm over here. Hello. I'm a production manager in
Yes.
television. I'm sort of beginning to make roads into drama at the moment.
Yes.
How do line producers or production managers go about actually budgeting for makeup in their films? Are there any guidelines for it? Can you say for this many minutes you need that much, or?
Not really. It's not that. It's more what the storyline. I mean, for instance, if you had a script where somebody is supposed to be bald, and you pick an actor with hair, it means that the makeup artist is going to have to do something to make them look bald. Whereas if you cast somebody who is naturally bald or who is willing to shave, you're better off. But that side of it is really you get into discussion. The earlier you recruit a makeup artist and you get in discussion with them over what it might entail, it's like if you had a script where I might get a script where it describes somebody as blonde and say 40, and you cast somebody who is dark, and I might say to you, well, how important is it for this person to be blonde? Does it really matter? And if it doesn't, you don't go down the road of a wig. However, if you said, no, it's crucial, then I would say to you, well, then we're going to have a wig made. And depending on whether I can find depending on budgets and who it is, and how big a name they are, and how often they're going to be in it, I can either get one that I rent, hire out for a week, or we have one made, and having wigs made is expensive.
Yeah, how much money are we talking about for, say you've got,
It can go up to 5,000, 6,000
for one wig.
wig.
But if we're looking at the whole makeup department, say you need to submit a proposal budget as a production manager.
It really is how, it's in a way how long if you're filming, if you're just a few days,
Yeah.
it's really how long is a ball of string.
I had a peek at someone else's budget recently, and it was 60 grand
Yes.
in there for makeup.
Yes.
And
When I tell you
amazing,
that say a silicone, if we're talking like a bald head, a lot of the time, I don't know, this is quite an interesting one because I do a lot of bald cat. I teach a lot and I put on a lot of bald cat for people. But there was a bald cat made out of silicone, shall we say, for a feature, for a film,
Yeah.
or even if it was made for television and it was made of silicone, you are looking at least sort of something like £3,000-4,000. Okay. If you're looking at one just to be able to make it do, you can call it £20. But that then depends on the expertise of the makeup artist, at how good they are. And a little while, I don't know how many of you watched Waking the Dead, but when the last series went out, the very, very first episode of the last series was about a woman who she was the baddie of the piece, really, but you thought she was going through chemotherapy, but in fact she was killing her children and she was shaving her head. I don't know how many people saw that. Well, that lady, the makeup artist on that came to me and said, help, I've got the worst case scenario. I've got a woman, long hair, they haven't really cast her yet, and there's no money in this because she's not through the whole series. I've got the whole series to go, and I've got to make this woman look as though she's going through chemotherapy. So not only was no hair, but no eyebrows. I think the director actually did at one point say, could we have no eyelashes? And she said, no, you cannot get rid of eyelashes. I said, well, come in and see what this particular type of bald cat can do. Now, she in the end, I have to say, it looked amazing. It was amazing. It was really good. That actress had hair down to here. And there were a few times where she had to look completely bald. You had no help from costume. Our main concern when you get that is that you immediately link into costume, because obviously scarves, turned up collars, things like that help, because the back of the head is really hard to disguise. When you haven't got one made to measure, and you've got a lot of hair to disguise, this is not an easy task. The final result, they did extremely well, but it took 2 of them 4 hours to do that makeup. Now, that was down to the expertise of the makeup artist, really, having to go that route, but it was having an understanding direct, in time to schedule that. I mean, they said it looked amazing, and she said, unfortunately, then it looks good, so they kept wanting to go in more and more, take advantage. But it did take 4 hours, and it did take 2 of them.
And budget-wise, it would have taken $4,000 at least for the cap?
No, because the cap, when I tell you, the cap they were using is roughly about £20 each.
Right.
But it's every time you do use one. It was
Right.
20. But that was then down to that expertise of the makeup artist. Now, if the makeup artist you employ can't do it, they might call on somebody else to come in and do it, in which case you might be then paying an extra person to do it. It does boil down to who you employ a lot of the time, and what they need. And also, if you categorically say you can only have X, then you only get Y. If you want things to look really good, there's so much that can be done reasonably, but then it does start to cost money.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. I'm afraid I can't give you a definite, because it really does depend on if it's 1 day, 3 days, 6 weeks. It varies massively, really. But a working day, I have to say, can vary. I mean, feature films are a different kettle of fish, but it can vary from about, on a feature film, £300 up per makeup artist employed on a daily, and that's quite low. And television, I know, is much lower, but it's around about, I think, 200, 210, something like that, for an assistant on the whole, and then you pay upwards. But it's an area, I think, that now, unfortunately for us, as I said earlier, really, if it goes unnoticed. I mean, we walked in with Catherine. Now, I'm not at a makeup show. I did the IMAX, which is our international makeup trade show, 2 weekends ago, and I was doing similar things, but then I'm amongst my peers. Here, when you're not told that Catherine had this on, most people didn't look at her. They avoided eye contact, didn't they? They didn't really want to see what I'd done. Well, they didn't know, so they avoided any eye contact because they presumed she'd been beaten up or had an accident or something, which was complimentary. It wasn't under the scrutiny of the camera at that point. So, when you're not told, you just accept it, then we've done a good job, really, which slightly undermines our value, because really, if it's not noticed, we've done a good job. Comments mean we haven't. Has anybody else got any questions?
Yes,
I don't know what
yes,
I'm running.
yes.
Yeah.
Please, do you have a website?
Do I have a website? I hate to tell you, but I don't have a website. I do a lot of teaching of prosthetic makeup now. I don't go out and work. As I've been in the business a long time.
How will find you?
How do you find me? I'll give you my number in a minute, if you like. I work at a place called Greasepaint a lot, and then I just I freelance.
I mean, you're sitting here to teach us, tell us what you do, and then you leave.
I do, yes, absolutely, yes.
Wow, great.
But I can talk to you afterwards. It's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
So very quickly here, because I'm not sure what the time. I don't have my watch on, so 10 minutes. So I'll just finish off. Oh yeah, that's okay. Well, actually, that's not too bad. It's a little bit orange, isn't it? I'm just mixing this up, just to show you when we do our wares, the cost of makeup. Also, this palette is in the region of about £80–90. So it's because it comes over from America. If we're in America, it's a lot cheaper. But our materials aren't for high definition things now. A lot of the materials are slightly more expensive. I'm not very good at doing and talking. When I teach, believe it or not, I do, and then I stop and talk and natter. So do ask if you want any other questions. And then, I teach at anybody who wants me to, really. Basically, the mainstay of teaching is at a place called Greasepaint, which is a private makeup school, and where Catherine trained as well. And then I teach also at the London College of Fashion, and I have done some things for West Thames. And I go, basically, I've gone to places like Hollyoaks and just brought them up to speed with silicone molds, and same at the Opera House, things like that. So I'll go anywhere if somebody pays me, basically. Because I am operate as a freelance makeup artist.
How would you advise, because I work as a freelance, I work as a freelance, but very young technician, special effects sort of stuff, but not really in makeup. I've done a bit of prosthetic adhesion and stuff.
Yes.
But how would you advise getting onto a production or as a trainee level?
You need to you need to find out who sort of is heading up teams on films, and then you send your CV, or you literally bang on their doors and keep sort of slightly. Unfortunately, it is that going in. I mean, the people. There's not many people who run. Have staff, as it were. It's done on a freelance basis. Neil Gorton of Millennium Effects does have quite a large workforce that he operates out of Amersham, I think, still. But otherwise, people crew up per film, really. So it's keeping ahead of the films, noting who the heads of department are. Mark Cooley would definitely get more more requests now. I mean, there are quite a lot of films. There's I believe, is it Sleeping Beauty? I think is about to, things like that. There's Sleeping Beauty, trying to think off the top of my head. I know that will involve quite a bit of prosthetics. They're crewing up for Les Miserables as well, but that's got an aging, but it's more subtle. I'm not sure that pieces are going to be made, I think, for the makeup artist to put on. That's what, as I said with somebody else with the different departments, sometimes a makeup artist, if you enjoy actually applying things, you tend to go to a prosthetic workshop and say, I need X, but I want to be able to apply them, or else you get a complete department who make and apply. So, anyway, that's sort of roughly, I give you an idea of blood and gore very, very quickly here to show that if you've fallen over, you can get stuff in that, and then run some blood. There's just a little bit of frilling around the edge, which isn't actually the edge of the piece. It's the release that was in the mould. We don't tend to do running blood till you're in situ, for the obvious reason that if I was doing this on Catherine here, and I ran blood, and then she's sitting with it sort of at another angle, we've got it dripping in the completely wrong way, so anything at speed. But this sort of thing can be done if somebody said, oh, we need a gash, or look, we offer it, and they go, no, we haven't got time. This is extremely quick. If I hadn't kept stop time, this could be done in 5 minutes. So this is one of the things that is actually very quick and very efficient. But to do it, you actually either have to have bought the moulds and the material to go in it first. So it swings around about really there. Anybody else got any questions?
Sorry, can I just ask what blood you're using?
This is by a guy who is really hard to contact, but he does have a website. His name's Dave Stoneham. I laugh because he's like a phantom. He's hard to get hold of, but he supplies he makes a lot of blood, and he'll make anything. Sugar-free blood, dark blood, any blood. If you want blood to sort of start to congeal, run and then stop and things like that, he will make anything. He's an amazing, but his website is MAE Makeup, MAE Cup, and his name is Dave Stoneham. We use a lot of his, but then Neil Gorton also has his own type of blood, and a lot of that is sold through a firm called Mould Life, and that's very good. Nick Dudman has his own, and most makeup artists bring out their own brands a lot of the time. They are much for muchness, but again, with blood, it's a bit more difficult to do it by eye. We do it by eye, but equally we have to know. For instance, on the for Johnny Depp, what was the one with all the blood and gore? He's the barber who Sweeney Todd. They actually had blood made up that looked very orange because of what they were going to do to the film. They needed to start with blood that was extremely orange so that it would work when they all put it in. So, but we're told about that. and all departments then link in. On the zombie one, we just they're still doing some more. The blood had to be really black, really dark. So, you know, you all sort of share things then, but that's discussed and sorted out beforehand. But his blood is really good, very, very good. He has all sorts. Safe ones to be in the mouth, as I say, sugar-free, because if you're filming in the summer, you can't afford to have, because it's bloods that are too sugary, because it's very easy to make your own blood. We tell students there's a lot of cuts that you can do. You don't have to go and buy, and sort of treacle or runny honey is a good basis for blood, but a disaster in the summer because obviously it encourages bees. It's like for frost and ice when people are in the cold. Icing sugar works extremely well, but again, it's really sticky and it's not very pleasant in the summer. So, you know, you can buy everything. When I first started, health and safety wasn't exactly out the window, but it wasn't quite so crucial. So when people had to be muddy or covered in grass stains, and you were where you were filming, you thought, well, we just use the real thing. Nowadays, that's an absolute no-no. You're just not allowed to use anything like that. It all has to be created because of health and safety. It's that there's a very, very strict criteria now of what you use. Blood cannot no longer be pig's blood and things like that. That's just not, you can't use anything that isn't not real really now. You have to create it. A colleague, in fact I had him into the students just recently, and he was describing to them, he worked on Wolfman, and he had to create bones that could be eaten by, it wasn't, can't think who played Wolfman. It was the stunt double anyway, but they had to have the wolf gnawing through muscle and bone, and they wanted to see it. And he created a mix using honeycomb and created these bones. They looked amazing, but they were basically like biting into a crunchy bar. But he managed to find a way of bleaching it so it did look more bone colour rather than too yellow. But so, you know, there's a lot of invention when you have to come up with different things, but it has to be health safety criteria. That probably rounds me up. Does that round me up, really? Give or take. Anybody else got any other questions?
I had one more. Hi, I'm here.
Sorry.
I'll just say, I worked on a film a few years ago where an actor had to have a prosthetic that covered his eyes.
Right.
And he had to have it on for a few hours, as you can imagine. It was the first time he really kind of felt the pressure, I suppose, on set. And I just wondered if you had any experience of that and kind of any way for actors to deal with it.
It's not easy. When, if actors have to have even some prosthetics on, in fact, even like Meryl Streep with having the whole face, it's amazing how suddenly people can find themselves claustrophobic. I did a commercial once where this man, he had to play a ceiling rose, in fact, but he basically this prosthetic had to be stuck, because every prosthetic has to be stuck. Every millimetre has to be stuck, or it doesn't move with the face. It will show, and therefore it can feel quite claustrophobic. So a lot of the time when you've got, say, things like Lord of the Rings or the big monster ones, that's criteria of hiring, not so much main actors, but certainly in the crowds, they're asked, are they claustrophobic? But some people don't realise quite how claustrophobic they are. And this man, when he'd had his head cast, I believe he'd grabbed one of the assistant's hands. There's no question of straws up the nose or anything like that. It's not done like that whatsoever. But it is, everywhere is covered, and it can feel quite claustrophobic if you find you are. So he survived all that. That was fine. But when it came to the commercial, I was putting this prosthetic piece on, and the prosthetic piece then had to be sort of glued also into a frame that fitted to the back of his head. And a makeup that basically was about 3 hours took 5. I had to go to the director and say, we've got a problem here, because he just wants to rip the whole thing off. He didn't know he was claustrophobic, and obviously commercials mean a lot of money, but it did mean we had a lot of time. And through the day, we had to keep calming him down, because he'd get waves of panic. So it is something we deal with, yes. And that's a sort of hidden part of our job, because especially when we start off with students, we say, look, experience and your craft will come. The main thing is teamwork and your personality. Well, reliability, teamwork, and personality, because we do deal with artists in their raw state, as it were. They show, generally speaking, to a makeup artist, they will be themselves. Whereas when directors or producers come in, they slightly change, or when other actors are around, but you see them, and it is quite a personal relationship you build up, and one that is actually very private, because you obviously are allowed into their sort of world of paranoia and fears and things like that. And there's an awful lot of building confidence up as well. Anybody? No, welcome. Anything else? Yeah. We've slightly digressed off what it is, but basically we do have, from the point of view of HD, it is to the eye, and we have to be good at what we do.
Would you be able to describe a day on a feature? How many hours would it take to work, especially if you have to do prosthetics?
Well, prosthetics people start very, very early. I mean, just to give you an example, when I was doing the zombie one out in Budapest, we were night filming. We started about 1 in the afternoon, and we got back to the hotel about 7:30 the next morning. Now, I wasn't on set the whole time, and I wasn't doing the main people. We were doing the zombies, and they would be on or they wouldn't be, and you'd be standing around. So there's a lot of standing around and then suddenly going for action and stopping again. But there's things to do. We then sort of prepped, got things ready for the next day and different things, but you take it in turns to go out. We were... I'm just trying to think, when we did the little bit in Malta on that, we were probably about 60 strong, and that's just the crowd and the zombies. So there's a lot of people involved in films. Television is very different, but you can still be doing a good 12, 14, 15-hour days. They're long days. You need a lot of stamina. And that just on another health and safety thing is, we say to people, if you've got to have stamina, and B, we don't break for lunch necessarily. It's like lunch, what's lunch? So a lot of things are continuous days now that people break, in a continuous rota. It's just done like that. And if you're a sort of person who needs to eat, you need to actually have all those things with you. But something that cropped up recently is that, and we emphasize it now, especially health, is that if you want a snack, it can't afford to be any snack with nuts, because nowadays when you're dealing with crowd, an actor, you might know exactly what they're allergic to, but crowds you don't know. So if somebody comes and sits in your place, they might not say, actually, I'm highly allergic to nuts. And if you've got it on your breath, it's only because there was a very, very near miss quite a while ago, 2 years ago, and it made me realize that when I talk to students, I need to say, if you need, to eat bananas, things like that, or snacks, but make sure they're slightly nut-free. I mean, we do obviously wash hands before you're doing somebody else. We use a lot of the little, hand cleansers, things like that, constantly. And obviously with brushes, it's another thing. But breath it can be on your breath. Anyway, that's sidetracked from HD, really. Sorry, is anybody else? Is that it? I think I've read it because I've got to pack this away. But if you think of anything else, you're more than welcome to ask us in a minute.